Hello, and welcome to Mechanicsburg Mystery Presents a second conversation with Tom Mead. Tom is a British writer with a fondness for locked room mysteries, the theater, and magic, and he has combined these interests into the character of Joseph Spector, a retired music hall magician who assists the police, particularly Inspector Flint, in investigating bizarre crimes. We're going to be talking about the third book in the series, Cabaret Macabre, which will be released in the United States in July 16th. And as a matter of fact, Tom, first of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's great to be back.
Yes, and in to celebrate the publication of Cabaret Macabre, there's going to be a free offer from you as well that readers of at the Mechanicsburg Mystery can take advantage of. Can you tell us about it?
Yes, absolutely. This is an exclusive offer of a free short story. You can't get this story anywhere else. It was written especially for this giveaway. The story is called The Invisible Alibi, and it's designed as a little appetizer for the feast of Cabaret Macabre. So it's just a little taster. And if you pre-order Cabaret Macabre, all you need to do is email your proof of purchase to Cabaret Macabre promo at gmail.com. And you'll receive the short story via return email. So yeah, if you just email that email address, then keep your eyes peeled and the story will be with you.
And this is one of a series of short stories you've written about Joseph Spector as well. So, and I had asked the last time if you're ever going to publish a collection of them as well. I love short story collections myself. So,
me too. And fingers crossed is the answer to that.
mm-hmm. All right. Like I said, we had in our first interview with Tom Mead, we had talked a lot about the first two books in the series, Death and the Conjurer and The Murder Wheel. We talked a lot about the creation of Joseph Spector. The one thing I didn't ask, Tom, you're setting the series in the 1930s when Joseph by this time has retired from the music hall stage. Why that era?
Well, I mean, I know in the past we talked about the golden age of detective fiction, the interwar period, and it's a period that I'm very interested in. But also, I read so much fiction from that time that it just came more naturally to me, I think, than perhaps even writing something set in the 21st century. It just made sense um, uh, to employ the trappings of a period that I knew well from my own fiction, and which I from the fiction I've been reading, that's to say, and which complements the trappings of the locked room mystery so well. Some of the best and most famous locked rooms came from that period, and to me, it was just a natural fit to go for the mid to late 30s as a time period.
And if readers want to know more about Joseph Spector and the background behind the first two books, especially, please go ahead to Mechanicsburg Mystery or to YouTube, look up A Conversation with Tom Mead. We talked about this for an hour. And got into everything golden age writers, locked room mysteries. Tom is very knowledgeable both about magic and locked rooms storytelling. So this
Yeah,
is why
it's nice of you to say that. It's very much my specialist subject. It's always been my area of interest, so I could happily yammer on for hours.
yeah, but this time we're going to talk about Cabaret Macabre, which is going to be quite. It's the same in a way in that it has Joseph Spector, Inspector Flint. It has locked room mysteries, several of them. But you also wanted to try kind of an experiment in doing something in a particular style. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, it's a slight stylistic shift, I suppose, because the first two were set in and around central London and Theatreland. And so the setting of the theatre was quite significant in both of those first two books. But this time around, I thought I'll shift. Um, shift things in terms of location. So it's more of a country house mystery. It's in a rural setting of a snowbound country house. But I wanted to retain a sense of the theatrical, which is what I love. And of course, this new setting allowed me to get into the atmosphere of the Gothic, and to really kind of play up the spookiness of the locale. But in terms of the plot, I thought it would be fun to, if you like, construct the novel as a retelling of a classic Jacobean drama, The Revenger's Tragedy. Now, this was an idea that had been sort of lurking at the back of my brain for a while, because Jacobean drama is very important in Golden Age detective fiction. There are so many allusions and references to, well, I mean, Shakespeare, most famously. Agatha Christie uses numerous quotations from Shakespeare in her titles. You have Sad Cypress, you have Taken at the Flood, but then also in Sleeping Murder, the Miss Marple novel, the John Webster play, The Duchess of Malfi, plays a major part and is very significant and important as a kind of mirror for what's going on in the plot. And then there are so many others. I mean, Ngaio Marsh, she is an author who, she was from New Zealand. She was another Golden Age great. And she wrote a lot about the theatre, but with a particular leaning towards Shakespeare. For instance, there's a late novel of hers, Death at the Dolphin, which features a glove that's purported to have belonged to Shakespeare's deceased son, Hamnet. And that becomes a focal point of the plot. And going back to John Webster, then moving forward in time, P.D. James, she uses the Duchess of Malfi as a key focal point in her novel, The Skull Beneath the Skin. So there's this kind of thread of the bloodthirstiness and the macabre of the Jacobean drama, and it's there in plain sight, if you like, throughout some of the best Golden Age detective novels. So I thought what I would try and do is appropriate the plot of The Revenger's Tragedy, which is quite an overlooked play in the canon of Jacobean drama, and it's I think it's a very over the top, very bizarre play. It's got a very high body count, as many of those tragedies do. It's very bloodthirsty. And there are so many of the trappings that Golden Age detection thrives on, like impersonation and deceptions and misunderstandings, misheard conversations, and misinterpreted clues and ideas and things like that. So to me, it was the perfect I suppose, counterpart to a Golden Age detective plot. But of course, the crucial thing is to retain a sense of mystery, because in The Revenger's Tragedy, it's obvious who's doing the revenging. So I thought what I would do is I would kind of invert it somewhat and try and use the key themes and give each character in the play a sort of equivalent in my narrative, but at the same time, if you like, transform it into a mystery, reimagine it as a classic style Golden Age whodunit. So that's the basic premise behind it. The way it unfolds in the novel is that we have a very unpleasant family who live at this country estate where they've gone for Christmas, and they are being picked off one by one by what appears to be this phantom or invisible killer that seems able to come and go as he pleases without leaving a trace in the snow. In with reference to the Revenger's tragedy, it seems that there's only one possible person who could be doing this. There's one person with a grudge severe enough to make him wipe out this family. But it appears completely impossible because he has been incarcerated in an asylum for the past 9 years. And so Spector is called in and is forced to look elsewhere for the culprit. So that's the basic premise. And as that little summary tells you, it's a very kind of bloodthirsty, I suppose, gothic and quite spooky piece of work as well. I had a lot of fun building up the atmosphere of the asylum, etc. So hopefully it'll play into that sense of theatricality I'm going for.
Yes, as fact, the initial crime that kind of spurs this, and then this is not a spoiler because this is right in the beginning of the book. It concerns the Drury family, which I love the little theatrical reference to that if you're actually thinking of Drury Lane Theater.
Yes, which I was, of course.
And there was a crime about 9 years ago. There was a death at the mansion of this woman who died under mysterious circumstances, and her lover has vowed revenge and actually attacked the judge and has been put into the asylum for 9 years running. And there's some threatening letters, some poison pen letters. And so Joseph Spector is being asked to look into this and see where the truth lies. So you could say the way you make it sound almost sounds like it's a Friday the 13th in which everybody's getting picked off in the woods. It's not quite that bad. It is, but
it's got a higher body count certainly than the first two, and I've tried to be quite imaginative in the way that each of these characters is murdered, and of course, in each case, there's an element of something impossible. There is a locked room mystery, but then there's also another variety of impossible crime which takes place on a lake, where a body is found adrift in the middle of a frozen lake, lying in a small rowing boat. And the question becomes, how did they get out there into the middle of that frozen lake? There's an electrocution as well. Somebody is killed in a very gruesome, bizarre fashion with a sports car. So yeah, I had a bit of fun with it, and I tried to make it as I suppose I wanted there to be an element of kind of black comedy about it. I was thinking of films like Kind Hearts and Coronets, which is a great Ealing film from the 1940s or early 50s with Alec Guinness, where he plays all the members of this family who are being picked off one by one because there's a distant relative who wants to attain this royal title. So and that's a comedy. It's a very funny film, but I think it's a very kind of I don't know, a very sort of English thing, having this this sort of upper class setting, and yet these very brutal crimes, which are just taking place all around, and nobody seems particularly fazed by them. I find it's quite surreal, and to me that's very entertaining and quite fun. So I wanted to build a bit of that in as well.
Yeah, so my wife and I saw several of the comedies in a row, including Kind Hearts, and there was also The Man in the White Suit, I believe, as well. If I'm getting the right one, it's definitely worth seeing. It's the kind of movie in which it's a black comedy, and yes, there are murders, but it's not obviously gory. It's it's very interesting, and like you said, very British, and I find that
yeah, I think
I find
it
that
is
very interesting.
Yes, and but another movie I watched it last night. In fact, was The Cat and the Canary, which is well, there are several versions. There's a silent version from the 20s, but then there's a remake was made in I think the 40s with Bob Hope, which was reimagined in a more comedic way. And then there was a very kind of high camp version that was made in the 70s, and this is another country house mystery, and in it a family is gathered for a will reading, and there's an escaped maniac on the loose and this kind of thing. It's a dark and stormy night. Some great imagery in that in all those movies, but particularly in the original, the silent version, with secret passages behind bookcases and things like that. And many of the things which would become cliches of the whodunit genre are all there in that movie. And I think playing with those kind of conventions is another fun aspect of Cabaret Macabre, because on the surface it's a country house mystery in the classic vein, but it's deliberately sort of kind of an inversion of that, because we have our suspect who's known from the outset, but it seems that he couldn't possibly be doing the crime. So, of course, we have to look elsewhere. But then, of course, everybody has motives for various different crimes. And it just becomes more and more complex and complicated as things go on.
What I thought was very interesting about the way the subject was handled, by the way the story was handled, was how, in a way, the characters involved, and I won't say who again, I'm trying to avoid spoilers, there's sort of a predestination about these people, because these are not in the Drury family. Some of these relatives, some of these siblings, they're not very nice people. And
No, that's it. Yeah, you're right.
it's almost like you have to think about the nature of revenge, and how, if they were not already morally failing, they wouldn't have been drawn into this. It wasn't like some of these people kill other people, but they were manipulated in it. If you're familiar with Curtin, if our readers are familiar with Curtin, you'd see exactly what's going on here. And I thought that was
That's it.
absolutely fascinating. Kind of makes you think about, if I was in that same situation, is it possible to be drawn in that way, if you weren't already predestined to do this?
Yeah.
And I'll also mention at the end there are several substantial twists. Again, no spoilers, but it's not just one person destroying this family. The family kind of destroys itself, and there are other people involved who, through their own actions, and there's the hard irony at the very end. You realize this: if people had been doing their jobs, none of this would have happened in the first place. And that is
Yes, 100%. And that's precisely what I'm going for. I love that sense of, well, it's a dramatic irony, this kind of great sweeping irony at the heart of everything, where you realize eventually that the whole thing was essentially futile. But hopefully we've all had a bit of fun along the way. I should probably mention the influence of Japanese mystery fiction, which is something that I talk about quite a bit when I'm doing interviews or when I'm writing articles. I will always I'll usually allude to Japanese detective fiction, or honkaku fiction, which is a kind of a subspecies of the Japanese crime novel with an emphasis on the puzzle. So in effect, it's the Japanese counterpart of the Western Golden Age whodunit. But in Honkaku mysteries, the puzzle is very much amplified. It's more complex, more bizarre. The murder methods are more colorful and strange, and the sort of golden age of honkaku was from about the 1940s through the 50s, and then in the late 70s and onwards, there was a kind of revival, or shin honkaku, which means new orthodox. So honkaku means orthodox, as in an orthodox puzzle, a fair played puzzle, where in the golden age tradition, where the clues are there so the reader can play along. So honkaku, I suppose, Ellery Queen, for instance, the early Ellery Queen novels would be examples of what the Japanese would consider a honkaku mystery, because of the the element of the game, of the challenge, the intellectual challenge to the reader, and that's something that's always fascinated me. I've loved seeing this sudden glut of translations that we've been enjoying of Japanese detective fiction by the likes of Seishi Yokomizo, Akamitsu Takagi, and then more recent authors like Soji Shimada, Yukito Ayatsuji. These are people whose work they've been writing for decades, but their work is only just receiving the translation and therefore the celebration in the Western world that it deserves. Another, I'm fascinated by this idea of bringing things full circle, you know, and everything kind of, you know, a kind of synchronicity of everything falling neatly into place. And a funny thing about Honkaku fiction is that it was a kind of response to the Western Golden Age, because in the aftermath of the Second World War, there was a sudden influx of translations of Agatha Christie, John Dixon Carr, Ellery Queen in Japan, and it exerted a considerable influence, I suppose, culturally, and it inspired a generation of crime writers, and so it was in effect taking the Golden Age to its kind of natural conclusion and sort of pursuing the puzzle to its most to its outermost reaches, if you like. And so I thought it would be fun to incorporate some of the Honkaku trappings into a Western mystery written in the Golden Age style. So kind of a mirror image, if you like, of the Honkaku, and kind of employing some of the classic tropes of the Japanese mystery, but within a Golden Age setting, just as a kind of an inversion and as a tribute to the Japanese mysteries that I think are so great and so inspiring.
At the risk of sounding learned, I actually looked up. You had mentioned one of the mysteries, the Tokyo Zodiac murders, and I actually
Yes,
looked it up.
brilliant book.
I looked it up on Wikipedia to read the summary of it, and it makes, I think, what you did like a Hardy Boys novel compared to what they were doing there. It was about kidnapping of multiple women and creating the perfect woman out of this alchemical slicing and dicing. And there's you just have to read it yourself, the Tokyo Zodiac murders, and I can see where you can look at that and go and be fascinated by that. It's very fascinating just seeing in general how someone like Agatha Christie gets translated. Teresa's been we've been doing a book on movie adaptations from international Agatha Christie. And
yes, fascinating subject.
It is, because they're taking her plots, and for example, with something like Appointment with Death, with its focus on the family, it translates beautifully to Japanese society with their focus on the family, but then they run it through their own concerns as well, and it feels different but still the same, and they're inspired by that.
To me, it's amazing how you can view a society through the lens of its crime fiction, and what you can perceive about a culture from the way that it portrays crime and mystery. I think it's a fascinating subject. But I made a conscious. I mean, I don't know what you'd make of Cabaret Macabre if you looked at it from that perspective, because it's consciously kind of diluting all of these influences and mixing them up into a single solution. So well, I suppose we'll see what the we'll see what people make of it. But hopefully it gives people kind of a whistle stop tour of the things that interest me and amuse me. It certainly kept me on my toes when I was writing it. So that's the idea.
Right. Personally, I wouldn't be able to see this. I think I would actually have to read some of the Japanese translations, and then I can look at something particular scene and go, that's where you got it from. Okay. Because it just reads like, you know, it can like you say, a Jacobean slasher flick, I guess, for lack of better words as well. And it works. The story works. Now, what I wanted to get into, which we missed previously was just some of your background, because I find that sort of thing fascinating. I understand, for example, that in university you took first class honors in creative writing, and you went on from there. What what was that like? I know about Masters of Fine Arts (MFA) programs in the United States, but I have no idea how it works over in Britain.
Yes, I mean, I don't know much about the way the way such programs work in the US, but I can tell you in the UK, it was a great and thoroughly useful and enriching thing to do, because obviously I had always wanted to write professionally, and it was a great way of giving me a sort of grounding in the various disciplines of creative writing and what it actually means to make a career as a writer. Um, it As always with any kind of academic background, I suppose there was an element of I suppose snobbery about genres, and an emphasis more on the kind of mainstream literary fiction, which is which is to be expected, I suppose. And uh, uh, having said that, there were elements of the course which engaged with crime fiction, and which introduced me to works like, well, I suppose kind of crossover works which are high literature, but which also engage with the trappings of crime fiction. So, I mean, I already knew the work of Patricia Highsmith, but there's an example there. Somebody who could write compellingly about psychosis and psychopathy, but at the same time employ all the kind of noirish trappings and themes that we expect. So she was somebody who wrote genre fiction, but who did it from a very a kind of rarefied perspective of somebody who had a great insight into the psyche. So yeah, I had a good time studying creative writing. I found it very interesting. I met a lot of great people, but a lot of people who wrote things very different to me. So I was always going out of my way to try different approaches and different things. And so crime fiction and golden age mysteries became somewhat of a guilty pleasure, because that was what I had enjoyed before I was studying. So it felt like I should kind of grow out of this now and do more serious things. But inevitably, as soon as I finished my studies, well, I completed my undergraduate. I did a master's degree as well, where I studied Freud, Sigmund Freud's Uncanny, which comes into play in the Spector novels in various ways, particularly in the first one and in the fourth one, which I've recently finished writing. So there's elements of Freudian psychoanalysis in there. But as soon as I finished my studies, I immediately lapsed back into what I had enjoyed beforehand. And it just it was like coming home, it felt very natural to kind of pick up where I'd left off and go back to these authors and discover new authors to me, who'd been writing at that time. So I was delving into the likes of Helen McCloy, for instance, who I had not read when I was younger, but I discovered her after I finished my master's, and her novel Through a Glass Darkly is fantastic introduction to her work, incredibly gothic, very eerie in its atmosphere, and yet a fair play mystery. And so that led me to discover the rest of her series. She's absolutely brilliant. And I suppose coming out the other side of my creative writing studies, it was just a question of seeing that there was perhaps more to the golden age than I had thought there was, because I was now viewing it from a more well-rounded perspective, I suppose, kind of grounding in literature and writing. And I was seeing things that the writers were achieving in their fiction that I hadn't noticed before. So I suppose I learned to appreciate Golden Age more, and I started writing for myself. I wrote a lot of short fiction. I did a bit of freelance writing whilst I was working in education. I ghost wrote a few novels, a few romance novels, a couple of thriller type novels, which were for digital publishers. And then I wrote a lot of content and copy for magazines and websites and things like that. So that gave me a necessary professional experience. So it gave me the ability to meet deadlines and to meet word counts and to, just cover all the day-to-day tricks of the trade, which were very helpful when I started finally writing stuff under my own name. And I was still working in education, but I started writing stories that were heavily Golden Age inspired, just as a fun exercise to begin with. And that was when I first started writing about Joseph Spector, and writing impossible crime stories, because it struck me that this was a niche that I was particularly fascinated by, and indeed quite obsessed by, this idea of the impossible puzzle, and turning that into a short narrative was a great intellectual challenge, I suppose. And it was a great way to engage readers. So I started submitting my stories, and yes, there were a few accepted. Well, there were a couple accepted by Harry Queen's mystery magazine, one accepted by Alfred Hitchcock's mystery magazine, and of course, knowing about the history of those two journals and all the big names, etc. It gave me a big boost in terms of my own confidence as a writer, and because I'd only submitted really just to well, I don't know what I was expecting, but I wasn't expecting them to be accepted. I had bought a book which was essentially a guide on how to get your work published, and it was part of it was about choosing your market and starting at the top and working your way down. And so that's what I did in those cases. I thought, well, these are the biggest ones in my particular area, so I'll go for them. And so when the stories were accepted, obviously it was a huge boost. It was kind of a validation of what I was doing. So that's really how I suppose, evolved my particular style, my particular approach to the world of writing. And I mean, I think I talked to you previously about during COVID, I was working from home. That's when I first started to develop the Spectre character and the impossible mysteries into something more substantial.
Yeah, actually, that was something we hadn't covered.
Oh, really?
Believe it or not. Yes, I found the story about it. Of course, it was during the lockdowns, and apparently
Yeah,
you had
that's right.
written the novels and
Yeah.
submitted them to Otto. Is that who you?
Yes, that's right. Otto Penzler at Mysterious Press, somebody who I did not know, but I was buoyed, you might say, to contact him because he and Lee Child published one of my short stories, not a Locked Room mystery, but they published it in their Best Mysteries of the Year anthology for, I think it was 2021. So I didn't know Otto, but he had contacted me in the first instance about this, which again was a remarkable thing, because obviously I knew his name, and in particular his Black Lizard anthology of Locked Room mystery short stories is an absolute Bible of mine. It's fantastic. So yeah, I thought, why not take a chance? So that's why I got in touch with him. And yeah, I had at that point, I had the first two books in draft, beginning to end, because I'd written them quite quickly. I was trying to emulate John Dixon Carr, who's a role model of mine, you might say, the master of the locked room mystery. And he was so prolific. I thought, well, I'll try and do that as well. I'll try and I'll write as much as I can while I'm of a mind to do so. So that's how I ended up with the first two books. And then Otto gave me a contract for the two books. He'd only read the first one, but he gave me a 2-book contract, and then we sort of just took it from there, really. And then when the time came for book 3, I was really starting from scratch because, of course, I'd had those 2 books that I'd churned out in a very quick succession, and then it was the business of seeing them in print. And now I suddenly found myself having to start all over again with Spector and try to come up with something new and a little bit fresh for him to do. So it was with that mindset that I started Cabaret Macabre.
That sounds like the troubles that a young music group encounters when they spend all their time doing the first album, and then they have to do the second one, and they have to do it faster than they spent the years on in the first one.
That's it, exactly. It's very much that kind of difficult second album syndrome, although in this case it was obviously the third novel, because the first two were pretty much the results of the same period, the same stretch of time when I was just at home writing. Well, I am quite prolific. I'm able to write quite quickly when I have to, and I've been putting out a book a year. So Death and the Conjurer was 2022, Murder Wheel was 23. Obviously, now we've got Cabaret Macabre in 24, and I've just finished book 4, which will be next summer, 2025. And here in the UK, of course, it works out at roughly 2 books a year, because last year we had Conjurer came out in the UK in the spring, and then the Murder Wheel came out in the autumn. So it was a very, I suppose, demanding schedule. But I love it, of course, because these are the stories that I'm very passionate about. These are the stories that I love writing, and I love talking to people about them. So it's I mean, it's not really work at all when it's something like this. But at the same time, starting Cabaret Macabre, there was an element of pressure, because you knew that the first 2 books had been had gone down quite well with the people that like that sort of thing. And so it was about trying to match or surpass what you'd done in those books. That was the way that I looked at it. And personally, I think Cabaret Macabre is the best of the 3 of them, because I suppose I was more meticulous and more sort of scientific in its creation and in its plotting. I was more delicate and refined, I suppose, in the way that I plotted it out. It's a lot more complex, and I like the moral ambiguities in it that you talked about earlier.
Yeah, it's one of the few books I've read in the mystery genre where you sit there afterwards and kind of think about the consequences of people's actions, and how some people get away with murder literally, some people don't. Sometimes I think this also, and it applies to real life as well, because there are people we know who they can be spendthrifts, or they could have serious health problems, and yet they would resist things that would make them feel better or make them save more money. And it's kind of the same thing. It's like we're really our own worst enemies.
Most definitely. That's such a great reading of it, because that to me is that's the heart of Cabaret Macabre, really.
Mm-hmm.
As it is the heart of the Revenger's tragedy.
Yeah.
It's a kind of a philosophical quandary that fascinates me.
Yeah.
But of course, with Cabaret Macabre, it's deliberately heightened. It's not a naturalistic piece. None of them are. And none of this would happen in the real world. But at the same time, it's about creating a sense of logic that works for the stories. And yet at the same time, I wanted it to, I suppose, evoke or suggest something that would just linger and hang around in the back of your mind,
Yeah.
about these kinds of broad broad theoretical questions, which
Mm.
are about, uh, justice and things like that.
Yeah, as long as you're here and you can educate me on this, because I can sort of see the connection between the title of the story and the story itself, but I'm wondering if I'm missing something. Obviously, the macabre part, definitely, but the cabaret
Yes,
part,
definitely.
is this still something I should work out myself, or and you won't say, which is
Well,
perfectly fine.
I mean, it's I mean, don't look too deeply. I think of it more as a kind of more of a kind of an impressionist approach. It's more of a broad strokes approach.
Ah,
But cabaret, I think themes of performance are there throughout. Performance and uh, fakery, deception. These are all part and parcel of the world of the theatrical, and cabaret, I suppose, as a kind of the elements of showmanship in Spector's character, but also in the, I suppose, exhibitionist tendencies of some of the Drury family. We have the frustrated actor, and we have the a showdown which takes place on the set in a film studio. And so I was fascinated by ideas of. Uh, well, I suppose distinguishing between what's real and what's performance, and a cabaret is what blurs that boundary, really. I think that's all there is to it. It's and also just the ring of Cabaret Macabre, I found entertaining.
oh, it's a beautiful title, absolutely beautiful. And yes, I can sort of see it. Kind of reminds me of the actor of the Bob Fosse movie based on the
Yeah,
musical back in the
yeah,
day, which has all these blackouts which comment on the action.
yeah.
And it occurred to me Baz Luhrmann's Moulin Rouge with Spectacular, Spectacular, which is just a title and meant to be just what it is and not necessarily connected to anything inside the show within the show.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, I think there's elements of intertextual as well. So, particularly in Golden Age fiction, the writers like John Dixon Carr, Hilary Queen, for instance, they would rely on their readers having a kind of grounding in the genre and a knowledge of other works within that genre. And I think in that respect, it was kind of postmodern before postmodernism became a buzzword. These were examples of works that had a knowledge that they were pieces of work, pieces of fiction. In The Hollow Man, for instance, Gideon Fell addresses the reader directly. He gives his locked room lecture where he runs through so many of the solutions that other mystery writers have used for the locked room mystery. And so I think that element of self-awareness in Golden Age detective fiction, which is also there in Cabaret, of course. And regarding the show Cabaret, I always think of the MC as this kind of liminal character. He sort of straddles that boundary between the real and the performance. And yeah, so I think it's about channeling all of that really into Cabaret Macabre. So that's why the title.
yeah, I see it. Well, thank you very much, Tom. I think we have covered everything we wanted to, and I'm very pleased. I'm very pleased with the book. I highly recommend it, and I recommend Tom Mead's books in general. If you
Thank
like
you.
locked room mysteries, and if you like something, I would say something a little different. And that's hard to say what that exactly is, except it is its own thing. And if you want something different, then I would recommend Tom Mead's books.
Thank you. That's the best. That's the best compliment I could hope for. Thank you, Bill.
Well, after reading so much stuff, it's always nice to see something I would almost say original come down the pike and say, "Wow, this is different. This fascinates me. I love it." So, anyway, thank you very much, Tom, for showing up. And this is Bill Peschel on behalf of the Mechanicsburg Mystery Bookshop. If you're interested in ordering the book, please contact the bookshop. And as Tom says, if you send in the proof of purchase, I'm sure they'll be very liberal about it, that you purchased the book. You'll get in return an original exclusive short story written just for Cabaret Macabre. And what was the email address for that, Tom, again?
It's Cabaret Macabre promo. So that's all one word: CABARETMACABREPROMO @gmail.com.
Very good. Thank you for passing the spelling test, Tom. And this is Bill Peschel, thanking you very much for showing up and listening in. And I hope that your favorite book is the one you're reading right now. Bye-bye. The Mechanicsburg Mystery Presents podcast is sponsored by the Mechanicsburg Mystery Bookshop in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. The store is open with limited hours, plus we accept appointments and offer a drive-by service. The store will also ship books to your home, including those from the Peschel Press Mystery line, including our annotated editions of novels by Agatha Christie and Dorothy L. Sayers. To learn more, visit the store at www.mysterybooksonline.com. And thank you for listening.